Is there any way to confirm with 100% certainty the existence of UFOs, UAPs, and extraterrestrials?
There, in fact, is an extraterrestrial non-human civilization. Our United States government actually in possession of a number of these craft and have recovered initially the bodies of some of these non-human beings that occupy the craft, and actually have taken into custody live, conscious, healthy members of this extraterrestrial civilization. There are at least 5 of these different species. You not only have the kind of short grays, they call them, the tall whites, the so-called mantis people, the reptilians.
When do you believe disclosure will happen?
I think it's likely to happen under...
Daniel Sheehan, thank you so much for making time to be here, bro.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Danny, you are one of the world's absolute leading legal authorities on anything pertaining to UFOs, UAPs, and extraterrestrials. You were directly involved with some of the most consequential court cases in American history, including the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, Iran-Contra, and much more. From your perspective and your experience, is there any way to confirm with 100% certainty the existence of UFOs, UAPs, and extraterrestrials?
I can tell you this, I am completely confident, to 100% certainty, that I could take the information and evidence that we have now and place it in front of virtually any jury anywhere in the country. I've done trials in 28 states now, and you could just take almost the first 12 people off the street, and put them in the box. You would even have to do a voir dire to select them and present the evidence that we have now, and allow any opponent to come in to present contrary evidence or to challenge the bona fides of the evidence we present. And I would bet you that that jury would come out of the jury room within 1 hour and determine that each of those things are true that you've said, that there, in fact, is an extraterrestrial non-human civilization that is in our galaxy, that there are UFO craft that they have designed over time, that they're coming and going from our planet, that they have more than one base here. Our United States government knows about this, is actually in possession of a number of these craft, and have recovered initially the bodies of some of these non-human beings that occupy the craft, and actually have taken into custody live, conscious, healthy members of this extraterrestrial civilization, and have interviewed them and have a considerable amount of information about these beings. And our government is actively engaged in a conscious effort to conceal all of this information so that they can actually reverse engineer the technology of the craft in order to try to design a delivery platform for nuclear weapons so that they can deliver a nuclear payload, into Russia or China, within seconds, so they can establish and maintain full spectrum dominance, military dominance over the planet. All of those things are true. And we could present actually a specific finding of fact to the jury to determine each one of those things. And they would conclude that each and every one of those things is true based on the evidence that's available.
What is the single most surprising evidence that you have come across for the evidence of UFOs, UAPs, and extraterrestrials?
The most surprising is the capability of more than one of these species to actually direct their conscious attention to the internal workings of the atomic structure of matter and actually alter one form of matter into another so that they can actually affect the material content of reality. That's the most interesting.
How do you know? What is the evidence that would substantiate that?
a number of interviews that I've done of individuals who have had direct face-to-face encounters with some of the ETs, usually through the process of having been abducted, actually involuntarily taken aboard one of these craft, and then they witness the ETs doing this kind of thing. They can actually generate uh, uh, aspects of reality in the presence of this person. And at first, they thought it might be just causing their brain to misperceive things or have some sort of illusion. But it turns out that it appears that these beings actually have the capability of transmuting matter from one form into another, the kind of thing that some of our human avatars have been proposed to have, to be able to manifest particular material objects and transform one form of matter into another, water into wine, if you will, let to levitate, to do these other things that are all supposedly impossible. But it devolves to this ability to direct their intention to the inner workings of the translation of inchoate quantum fields into integers of matter, of either mass or energy, a wave of energy or a particle of mass. That whole so-called double slit experiment that we're bumping into all the time, that through directed intention, you can actually generate a statistically significant impact on whether or not a particular inchoate quantum field will manifest in the next 1 trillionth of a microsecond, into a wave of energy or a particle of mass. That we know that can be done by human beings on a microscopic level. And the question is whether or not the beings have a greater capacity to do that, and very importantly, that they seem to have developed a technology that is able to amplify that particular capacity of an individual ET to direct their intention to the innermost workings of the transition between an inchoate quantum field and a material manifestation of that, and manipulate matter and manipulate reality. that's that's the most profound uh, discovery.
I believe you are an incredibly important person in a conversation like this because of your background and who you are in the world. And who are you, and why should anyone listen to your perspective about this? What was your involvement in the Pentagon Papers? What was your
All right.
involvement in
Yeah.
Watergate? What was your involvement in Iran-Contra? Why should anybody give a crap about your perspective on this if they're not familiar with you already?
Yeah. Well, it's just that I've been fortunate that down through the 50 years or more that I was trained at Harvard College, in Harvard Law School, and Harvard Divinity School, in American foreign policy and American history and U.S. government procedures. And I, had foreign policy from Henry Kissinger at Harvard College. I came out. I was a co-founder of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review back in 1968. I was the one that initiated the case that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court to establish the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. I was then recruited by the number one corporate litigation law firm in the country, Cahill Gordon, down on Wall Street, who were legal counsel for NBC at the time, to work on that case at the Supreme Court level. And I was the one that got the call from Jim Goodell, the general counsel of the New York Times, when they got all 47 volumes of the Pentagon Papers, because of my work on the case protecting the right of journalists to protect their sources. And so we ended up doing that case at Cahill. We did the Pentagon Papers case. We secured the right to publish all 47 volumes of the above top secret information that was in those files about the Vietnam War, and it played some significant role in bringing to an earlier end the Vietnam War. That I was the one that initiated the case in the Iran-Contra scandal, that filed the federal criminal racketeering charges against the off-the-shelf enterprise of Oliver North. Ended up getting 14 different people at the highest levels of the Reagan-Bush administration criminally indicted by Lawrence Walsh. I was the one that initiated the case and ran the investigation in the Karen Silkwood case that stopped the construction of all private nuclear power plants in the country. And in the Watergate case, I was the one that was retained by F. Lee Bailey to represent James McCord, who was the CIA wiretapping specialist that got caught in the Democratic National Headquarters. He's the one that wrote the letter to Judge Sirica, blowing the whistle on the plumbers unit, and that led to the ultimate effective impeachment of Richard Nixon. I've done all those other things. And while I was doing all of those things, I also became chief legal counsel for Dr. John Mack at Harvard University. I was the one contacted when President Carter was elected in 1976 to be special counsel to an investigation requested by President Carter to investigate the reality of the UFO phenomenon and any extraterrestrial civilization that might be the source of that. And because I was at Jesuit headquarters, I was the chief counsel at the United States Jesuit Order at the headquarters in Washington, D.C., in their social ministry office that was in charge of public policy formulation. And I was contacted by Dr. Marcia Smith, head of the Congressional Research Service, to get access to the information in the Vatican archives about UFOs to provide to President Carter. So that I've done all of those things in the past, and that's why I was retained by Dr. Stephen Greer to be legal counsel for the Disclosure Project for 20 years. And that's why I was contacted by Luis Elizondo, who was the head of the top secret program inside the Pentagon investigating UFOs, to help him prepare his complaint to the Inspector General of the Defense Department, complaining about the fact that the Department of Defense, the Pentagon people, and the CIA and the intelligence community were lying to Congress, committing perjury and concealing information from Congress about this UFO phenomenon, and engaged in a whole series of criminal activity, including embezzlement of hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, actually, of funds that had been appropriated for other programs to secretly fund the attempt to reverse engineer these craft to develop these alternative weapon systems. So I've been involved in all of those cases down through the years, and it's from the perspective of those cases and learning about the kind of inner workings of our intelligence community and the interface with Congress that I've happened to have come into possession of a certain information as the years have gone by, that I've been able to assemble into a kind of a coherent narrative that explains sort of what's going on here. That would be my short answer.
That's a pretty good short answer. Why are you able to say the things that you're saying without being suppressed or silenced?
Because I've never taken any security oath. I've consistently refused to take a security oath. I've never signed a non-disclosure agreement because I don't need to. I can find out all this stuff, without having to take any such a pledge. And so I'm completely free to tell anybody anything I choose to that I've discovered.
Who exactly is suppressing the information about UFOs and extraterrestrials, and how long have they been suppressing that information?
Well, they've been failing to reveal it all the way back to 1945. They've been actually actively engaged in suppressing it since 1947. There was this whole period between 1945 and 1947 when, for example, they were given a UFO that crashed in Italy back in 1933. At the end of World War II, Pope Pius XII actually delivered this craft that had been retained by the Mussolini government. It turned it over to the United States, but right at the end of the World War II, there was such chaos around the world and with the Marshall Plan and everything that was going on that they didn't quite know what to do with this craft. But in 1947, when they recovered the debris from Roswell and the bodies of the people in the craft, they set up a specific organization. President Truman, set up a special organization to actively suppress the information so that they could be used for potential weapon development, et cetera. So they've been actively engaged in the suppression program since 1947. Uh, and that group has descended down through a couple different generations now. And there's probably a third generation of people that are involved in that specific group. But they have been operating under the color of law now for some 80 years. And having the color of authority to give directives to high level military officials, to actually have them set up military operations to recover craft and actually bring down craft. They've actually developed some sort of a scalar weapon that can be directed at a UFO and interfere in its whole navigation system that forces them to land, and then they've captured them. So that program has been underway for some almost 80 years.
And the crafts contain biological material, including
Yeah,
synapses and dendrites, and
yeah,
they're operated telepathically.
that's right. That is right.
How do we know that? What is the evidence that substantiates that?
Well, they've been actually undertaking to try to open these craft up. Once they recover them, they've been trying to, open them up and get inside them and try to determine what their inner workings are. That Dr. Eric Davis is the chief engineer actually in this program, and I've had a number of conversations directly with him. He's acknowledged the some of the inner workings of these craft. And the really interesting thing is that he has now recently been authorized to talk about that. So that there's a dynamic going on high in the internal workings of this program to decide to reveal some of this information that began, as you know, in 2017 when Luis Elizondo and Christopher Mellon being the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, both under the Democratic administration of Bill Clinton and then the Republican administration of W. Bush, and Christopher Mellon and Luis Elizondo uh, are the ones that brought the now fairly well-known videos, the F-18 Super Hornet video, the gun camera videos of the Tic Tac and the gimbal and the other craft. Now so that process began this newest era of revealing part of the information about all of these craft has been going on now. It's going on now 10 years since 2017.
What evidence do you have to suggest that ETs are able to manipulate the properties of matter telepathically and
Wow.
be able to
Well,
engage the world in that way?
Well, there are numerous accounts now that have been conveyed to the Senate Intelligence Committee, actually, about these craft, like materially manifesting and disappearing right in front of you. That they travel from point A to point B, vastly faster than the speed of light, and it quite clearly involves something similar to telepathic transport of teleportation, and that this is undertaken consciously by the beings. That it's a peculiar form of like almost remote viewing that people know about. That they can remote view a distant place, and then through adequate intentionality amplified by this technology that they have that can actually manifest the actual being or an entire craft at a place that's 10 million light years away. It's not a question of having to accelerate it, at a higher and higher speed linearly. It transfers kind of from place to place like that, and that this is done by directed intention. The same type of directed intention that enables a person to statistically affect a particular inchoate quantum field at the subatomic level to determine, not determine in a fixed way, but to a statistically significant degree, whether that particular inchoate quantum field is going to manifest as a wave of energy or a particle of mass. And when you can, once you've established the principle, you've broken through the limitations of the Newtonian Cartesian worldview that assumes that there's a complete separation between intention and the actual way that the material world manifests. And so once that principle has been understood, it's a question of scale of exactly how on what level this kind of ability exists in some sort of a sentient being. And we have all kinds of stories, of course, that you know more than most, about the human avatars that are capable of doing these kind of extraordinary things that has to do with bilocation and astral travel and remote viewing. These are qualities that our human species has, and that we're in a process of evolution. We've evolved, from originally Australopithecus, to coming down out of the trees onto the plains of the Serengeti, and then evolving into Homo erectus, and then Homo habilis, and Cro-Magnon man, and Neanderthal, and now we've evolved into Homo sapiens. But we're not going to stay here forever. We're going to evolve into an additional iteration of our human family, and that the one of the primary differentiating characteristics of the next iteration of our species is this faculty to be able to directly, experientially engage the unitive phenomenon that bonds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire universe into one unified harmonic whole. And by dint of this experience, that we can actually discern what type of human conduct, individual or collective, is either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of the universe. This is the fundamental underlying premise of natural law. And all of the avatars talk about this. Well, they don't all talk about it because some of them know it doesn't do any good to keep talking about it to people that don't understand it. And so they don't talk about it, but they just do it. And we know that about our human family.
I'd like to take a moment and share a word from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Quince. I just got these sheets from Quince. This is my second pair because I like them so much. They are so comfortable and delicious on my face. August always feels like the perfect time to reset your routine after a busy summer. One of the easiest places to begin is with your bed. Quince makes it easy to bring that comfortable hotel-like feeling home without the typical luxury markup. In fact, everything is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands because Quince works directly with ethical factories and cuts out the middleman. Their organic cotton sheets are breathable, incredibly soft, and made for lasting comfort. That's what these guys are. I've been using Quince bedding, and it genuinely makes the end of the day feel more calming and luxurious. It is one of those simple upgrades you appreciate every single night. If you would like, upgrade your every day. Download Quince app for app-exclusive offers or go to quince.com/align. Get free shipping on your order and 365-day returns, which is pretty awesome. Now available in Canada and the UK as well. That is Quince, QUINCE.com/align. I'm actually going to the Romero Institute in like 5 days to learn how to remote view. We'll see how it goes. I can share about it when I get back. I was just recording a conversation with Filippo Biondi. He's the scientist, I think perhaps you could say, that discovered the long shafts or cylinders beneath the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx that lead into the 80 meter by 80 meter by 80 meter large chambers deep below the surface. And the pyramids are just the very tip of a much broader iceberg.
Yeah.
And his suggestion, which seems to make sense in my mind, intuitively speaking at least, based on the location of the pyramids, they're apparently these are beyond things that I understand, but it's at the geographic center of the Earth. The latitude matches the speed of light. The dimensions of the pyramids match the dimensions of Earth at a reduced scale.
Yeah.
There's consistencies with other pyramids around the world. The math of the pyramids is they match up to Orion's belt. They
Hmm.
are There's a lot going on there that would suggest it probably wasn't just some cavemen with like sticks and stones kind of pushing stuff around. There was some deep intelligence happening there, with
Hmm.
many of the megalithic structures around the world as well, but the pyramids being a part of that. And his suggestion, Filippo's, was that the pyramids it's a technology or a tool to create perfect coherence with the earth and the elements in the universe, to be able to create somewhat of, like, I'm adding a lot of language here, but almost like a portal. And within that portal of coherence with all things, you can begin to access all things
Yeah.
and access energy and access astral projection or teleportation, perhaps, or moving through the infinite information of the world and the properties of the world.
Hmm.
And I wonder, from your perspective, how long do you think that ETs, how long do you believe ETs have been interacting with Earth?
Well, it's interesting. My area of specific expertise actually, begins back in the origins of our United States government. My whole field is government studies, and in the tracking of our United States government coming into possession of the craft and setting up these special programs to conceal it and develop the weapon system and all that. I've been aware of the other studies that have been done pertaining to the pyramids, and I've had long conversations with Peter Tompkins, who wrote one of the books on the secret of the pyramids. And Peter has explained in some great detail to me his belief that either the information was either downloaded to adepts, human adepts at the time, telepathically, to know how to go about designing these things, or the actual beings themselves participated in it. And I don't really know which of
Mhm.
the two things is true, but I know that there's an entire field of knowledge about that. And it's rife, of course, as you know, with speculation,
Of course.
and projection, and some downright myth making about all of this. So you have to disentangle those elements of that information. But it's quite clear that there was access to information that greatly exceeded, any capabilities that had been sort of linearly developed, by the culture at that time, the human culture. But we don't know what the nature of that intervention was.
So, if the spacecraft or UAPs, UFOs that have been found are laced in some type of biological fiber optic
Yeah.
circuitry of sorts, with neurons
Yes.
and synapses and dendrites and such, that it's like this flying biological system
Yeah.
that's connected to, or perhaps entrained might be appropriate language, to another biological system that we'd call an ET
Yes.
navigating it? Is the ET
Yes.
somewhere else? How would that work?
Well, it's interesting. The evidence is quite clear that there was a helmet that has been found in the craft, that is worn by the pilot, who's physically in the craft, that actually navigates the craft telepathically. Uh, and it's not clear the larger ships. I mean, the big, huge ships, that are like the size of a football field or more. That you assume they're piloted the same way with some of the same technology, but the ones that we've recovered are the smaller craft. The kind of maybe 30, 40 meters wide. And have been punched open and examined. But I know that there's ample evidence indicating that these large triangular craft that can move at these absolutely astonishing rates of speed, or actually from place to place, they move from over 80,000 feet, if technically at the edge of outer space, down to the surface of the earth in like 7/10 of 1 second. zip, zip like that. And these are craft the size of larger than aircraft carriers, you know. So that but it's assumed that the technology is similar, that somehow they're probably piloted telepathically as well, but we know it from the smaller objects, but I don't know of any one of the big ones that has been disassembled and internally analyzed like some of the smaller ones.
Is there clear evidence suggesting technology that humans would know to be common today comes from ETs?
Oh yeah, I mean the silicon chip was recovered, according to Philip Corso, from the Roswell crash, in fiber optics themselves. These are,
Mm.
and then the Kevlar technology, the night vision scope. It is, you see all of our troops in the Middle East now, flopping down their night visions to go and kill people in the dark, But they got that technology, according to Philip Corso, came out of the Roswell craft. He's written about it, and he was eventually in charge in the Pentagon of foreign material development, and that he was actually put into possession of this. So that each of those technologies appears to have originated, or at least been dramatically advanced by the recovery of the technology from the Roswell craft.
How many people on the planet would know with 100% first person emphatic evidence that all this is true? Like 1,000, 500, 100, 50,
Well,
thousands?
Well, there would be differing amounts in pieces of the information known by different people. There's an awful lot of siloing, of this information. But if you're asking like what number of people at any given time know about all of it,
Yeah.
and have a coordinated understanding of it, you're probably dealing with no more than 50 people at a time, in almost any given generation. It's extraordinarily closely held. So I would say that it's no more than 50 people at any given generation.
Is there actively human beings right now holding UFO craft in their hands, working on reverse engineering technology? Is there actively human beings holding on to the carcass of an extraterrestrial, working, dissecting? Is this happening now? And if so, where is it? Obviously, you don't know
Yeah,
what's happening in this
yeah,
instant, but
no,
it's like,
absolutely. That definitely so. Now, I don't know how much more dissecting they're doing because they have live
yeah,
ET beings that they're talking to, and discussing these things with, and probably they're sharing information. They may well be sharing information about their own biology in their own cultures, and But there, it was at the beginning they were doing that, and I've interviewed face to face persons who have been present in the physical presence of live ETs at S4, you know, that so I've talked to them, and that's in kind of a supervised setting, as distinct from people whom I've interviewed who, have had a UFO land in the meadow next to their house out in the countryside, and they've ended up going aboard and seeing the beings and communicating with them, etc. But they're not the people that have been involved in dissecting the beings. That they engaged in examining the remains of the beings from the Roswell crash back in 1947. They brought him down to Houston, to the medical center down there first before they brought them to Wright Field. But they examined the remains of that's why they referred to it as biologics. I mean, that they were, the crash had dismembered some of the occupants. But they ended up coming into possession of full bodies of craft because they shot down some of the UFOs. They shot them down, and that they got them, and they recovered the whole bodies. So the details we have of them having done autopsies on them and give detailed about what their internal organs are like, etc. But so I'm not sure how much of that's still going on because I don't think it's necessary still. They've figured out most of that stuff. but that there are live beings now, live ET beings now, for sure, that are in communication with our people and meeting face to face with them.
How is something like this kept secret for so long?
Well, by uh, obfuscation, threats that are made to people to ruin their entire careers if they reveal any of it, even under the point of threatening to kill them. I mean, there is an NDA, a level of NDAA that one signs, in which you, as a condition for being given access to some of the highest levels of this information, that you agree in writing, sign it, that you can be shot down at any moment on the street, period, if you reveal this. It's a terminal agreement. That you come to the sites, for example, you come to Area 51 or S4, you see the signs up, lethal force authorized, and they've taken unto themselves the authority to engage in the use of lethal force to protect the facilities, but also to protect the information, and so that they actually get people to agree in writing that if they are being given access to this information, that they can be terminated physically without any due process, no recourse to their family, to they waive any kind of rights to sue the government or anything for killing you. So, I mean, that's a pretty good deterrent.
Who, from your perspective, who or what is the most powerful agency or entity on the planet?
Oh, well, that's different. But my judgment would be that it's probably something like the executive committee. They call it the what is it? It's called the it's the executive committee of the International Sovereign Order of the Knights of Malta.
Hmm. What the heck is that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, thereby establishing my point. It's not something that's really known to everybody, but there's it's a, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's a committee. It's a committee of folks. Henry Kissinger was on it at one time. Strangely enough, George H.W. Bush was on it at one time. And the Sovereign Order of the Knights of Malta is ostensibly a Catholic group, that the Otto Skorzeny was on it. Other high-ranking Nazi officials were on it at one time. Uh, we have to be a little careful because it sounds a little bizarre. But I mean, you ask the question not just as what the highest levels inside the government are, but what is the kind of most powerful or influential group on the planet? And it's when very very high ranking people from different governmental institutions linked together with extraordinarily wealthy people in a secret society where they engage in collective decision making and choose to coordinate their activities, that they become extraordinarily powerful behind the scenes, and they have access to the financing. They have access to these gold shipments. There was 1.2 trillion dollars in gold taken from the Philippines back in December of 1945 by Ed Lansdale, who was the G2 U.S. Army G2 there. That was gold that had been stored in the Philippines by the Japanese government prior to World War II. That they had a unit in the Japanese government called the Golden Lily, the commander of which was General Yakushima, and they garnered all of this gold and platinum and silver and precious jewels all together as a war chest for the Japanese Empire before World War II. And as World War II came to an end, they snuck it out of Japan because they thought there was going to be an invasion of the Japanese islands. They buried it in various places, 176 different troves of it in the Philippine Islands. And the G2 of the United States Army, Lansdale, learned about it And when General Yakushima turned himself in after August of 1945, after we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he surrendered. And Ed Lansdale captured his driver, General Yakushima's driver, figuring he was with Yakushima when they buried these 176 tranches throughout the island, so he could figure out where any of them were. And he actually recovered 12 of them. 12 of them, and went and told MacArthur about it. MacArthur then sent his G2, Willoughby, the guy's name was, along with Ed Lansdale to meet with President Truman in Washington and told Truman about it. And they set up through U.S. military transports, airlifted, $1.2 trillion worth of this gold out of the Philippines and secretly deposited it in a bank account in Switzerland, the International Credit Bank, and then wrote gold certificates on that, issued gold certificates like legal tender, bearer bonds, and used them to finance covert operations throughout Europe. So there's a long set of these traditions that go on. So there's these secret things that go on behind the scenes, usually under the cover of covert operations on behalf of governments. But when individuals, extraordinarily wealthy individuals, who get their hands on some of this gold, for example, as you know, I mean, there's this bizarre correlation of someone who happens to have lots and lots and lots of money, that politicians flock to them and and ask them their opinion. I mean, like, who gives a shit what their opinion is? Except, well, they've got billions of dollars and they're going to share some of it with me, and so they praise them and tell them how good they are and play golf with them and go to clubs together. And then they start forming these groups of people in this group. There was, for example, there was a 33rd degree Masonic temple or a group that was in Italy. It was called Propaganda Due, was the name of it. It was a 33rd degree Masonic group, and it had the Chief Justice of the Italian Supreme Court on it. It had the commander of the Italian military on it, the head of the police in Italy, the national police. It had a number of billionaires on it, and it was a group that were coordinated so that if, in fact, the communists won a majority of votes in the Italian legislature, that they would undertake a coup against the government of Italy. And they were, so that was just a particular kind of society like that. And the guiding ethic of that happened to be a fascist one. But there are those who are involved in knowing some of these secrets. And the deepest secret of all is the existence of this extraterrestrial civilization all around us. And that there are people who know about it and have kept it secret.
I'd take a moment and share a word from a sponsor that I am sincerely very excited about, because I have been using them even before they became a sponsor. It is ButcherBox. ButcherBox delivers to your door the highest quality protein at an affordable price. I think they're amazing. They care very much about the life and the quality of the animals, so they are third-party humane certified. There's no antibiotics used. The fish that you're getting from ButcherBox are wild caught. The meat is pasture raised, is grass fed. The animals are living a sustainable, healthy, happy life. And I think that the sourcing of your food, no matter what you're eating, whether you're eating plants or veggies or fruit or animals or whatever, I think the source matters most. I think this is such an important detail, and ButcherBox handles that. If you want to get highest quality protein delivered to your door at an affordable price and get yourself a discount, you can go to butcherbox.com/align to get $20 off your first box, plus your choice of free ground beef for life or free chicken thighs or top sirloins in every box for a year with free shipping always. That's butcherbox.com/align. Again, that's butcherbox.com/align. Be sure to use my link so they know we sent you. This is kind of a dumb question, but if you had to pick a percentage of the average human being's awareness of the world, politics, human history, geopolitical happenings. What percentage do you think we're actually, the average American or me or whatever, is actually accurate? Like, yes, this clearly objectively is the way things are and everything you think is true. And what percentage do you think is a total lie that people are living under?
Well, it's a kind of a compound question, but as I say, it varies in different countries, of course, depending upon the educational level and the level of critical thinking that is actually developed within the culture. The levels of education in certain European countries and in the United States and in some other countries is pretty high, but it doesn't directly correlate to you getting accurate information. You can be very, very well informed within a given culture, and what you're well informed about is the cultural theory of reality. Like
Correct.
I was, as I say, I was fortunate enough to graduate from Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and go to Harvard Divinity School and talk to some of the allegedly better informed people in the world, but they were feeding you a ration of bullshit, about the United States defending democracy around the world, and trying to recruit us into supporting the major corporations and et cetera, and that it takes a lot of training in critical thinking to actually transcend that kind of propaganda that even in the higher educational levels one is exposed to within a given country. Now, there are the people who are not given access to education or critical thinking at all. They don't get to even be trained to engage in critical thinking, and that's clearly a majority of people throughout the world. But in the United States, the number of people who get just a high school education, doesn't it doesn't enable you at that point in time to make any kind of a substantially well informed judgment about anything. you know, it teaches you basically how to read and how to do math and how to do some kind of analytical thinking. But if you stop there in your educational process, you're going to be functioning probably at a level of having no more than 10% of the information that you need to make a truly well-informed judgment, about most anything. And if you're fortunate enough to get to go to college and you graduate with a bachelor's degree, depending upon how specialized that is, if you have one in biochemistry or engineering, you know a lot about that particular field, but you don't, by definition, know a lot about a lot of other things. But if you have a general education, a so-called liberal arts education, one of the most important features of a liberal arts education, at least ostensibly, is to teach you how to engage in critical thinking. The challenge is that a state-funded education, state universities or public schools, you know, don't have any interest in having you engage in undue levels of critical thinking. Their job is to get you indoctrinated to support the state. Not surprisingly, Rudolf Steiner talked about this a lot. If you have a state-run educational system, they will propagandize you into supporting the state, whether you're in Germany, Nazi Germany, or Russia, or United States, or anywhere else. But the bottom line is that if you have a liberal arts, a well-grounded liberal arts education, you're going to begin to suspect that there's stuff that that's being concealed from you. That's one of the first insights of a genuinely well-designed liberal education. You'll start to guess that there's stuff going on behind the scenes that you are not being told about. And it's one of the first insights that you get. And once you've gotten that insight and you start looking at that and start using the tools that you've been trained to use of research and writing and critical thought, and you start probing into these areas that are being actively concealed from you, then you get access to more and more information. And what the process is, I don't want to go too deeply in this, but the process is the more you find out about these things going on behind the scenes, the more there's an attempt to recruit you to become part of that. They say, now that you've figured this out, get on board, and enjoy the benefits of being part of the inside group that knows what's really going on. And most people don't resist that. They're enticed to become part of that kind of more clandestine realm, and they're actively recruited. The Central Intelligence Agency is a classic example of that. They seed all of the major universities with people looking for smart, critical thinkers and try to recruit them into the CIA. And professors all around. Arthur Smithies, who was the head of Kirkland House, where I was at Harvard College. They found that he was actually a recruiter for the Central Intelligence Agency. And there are others that the same thing is true of the Catholic Church. Catholic Church, keeps its eye out if there are people who are disposed toward being religious and kind of loyal to the Catholic Church, and they're smart and kind of more theoretically spiritually evolved. They try to recruit them. They would try to recruit them to become priests and to become nuns and come inside the institution, and then they're willing to share more of the esoteric information. This is a very common thing that goes on in the human family. And so my sense is that depending on how you want to divide up the levels of knowledge, if you set up a tier system of, say, there's those that believe that have about 10% of the information, I would say that covers people who have basically a high school education. If you have a college education, you have about maybe 25% of the information that you really need to have in order to figure things out. If you're in the group that's done serious critical thinking, and you break into going up onto a PhD level or a graduate school level of trying to find out more and more in a given field, you can get all the way up to 33 to 35% of the information. And if you can avoid being trapped into one of the institutions and structures, then you can possibly get up to 50%. And once you break across 51%, and you start realizing that there's in fact a lot more that you didn't realize, and that there's this entire interesting spiritual dimension going on, which has to do with human consciousness and these extraordinary capabilities that our human family has, that are they're not being actively concealed as such because they're open secrets. If you just happen to see, but our generation, my generation at least, were one of the very first to really get access to a lot of the writings of Eastern mystical traditions. Up in the 1920s, you got a lot of this stuff with the Theosophy Society, Blavatsky and that crowd, the Theosophists. And you got a lot of the people coming over from the Far East, to come over and tell people about the Buddhist and Hindu dimensions of knowledge of these secrets, the secrets that are learned by the esoteric traditions in the quote religious community have punched in to a whole set of secret information about the human person. Okay, that and no matter how much they could leave pamphlets on the school benches, and the kids wouldn't read it. So I mean, the question of how you effectively communicate to people the essential verities of mystical insight, is a long and arduous debate that's gone on throughout history about how you can share this information, but the bottom line is that's an entire realm of secret information that I would say probably 95% of the people that have ever lived don't even penetrate into that area. They don't have access to that secret knowledge. And then there's another whole category of it in the political realm that that probably 75% of the people that have ever lived in the history of the world don't punch into any of that. They don't engage in the political decision making. So they don't bother to even figure out what's going on there. So my sense is that the percentage of people that have adequate information to be able to make really well-informed judgments about what's going on in the world is kind of frighteningly low. Uh, and so for a public education organization, such as, for example, our New Paradigm Institute, one of the major things that we're engaged in is trying to figure out how to share this information in a way that gets the attention of enough people, who are taking up their time, with football games and World Soccer Cups and any one of the 500 movies that you can sit in your house and, talk to your television now technologically and sit and, zone out on watching, mindless movies, the significant majority of people in the country don't pay enough attention to really get access to this information.
Is
And
that
I,
specifically by design, or are people? Is there a particular specific design to keep people kind of numb and stupid and distracted?
Well, there's the old, bread and circuses argument, that the people in positions of political power can just toss out breadcrumbs to people and engage them in kind of circuses and entertain them. And so there's the higher ranking people inside the culture. Some of them do that intentionally. Most of them do it just to try to make a maximum amount of money.
Right,
you know, but it's not a self-conscious part of the manipulation. It's when you
right.
get things like the Central Intelligence Agency or the KGB, or the Mossad, or MI5. You get these kind of conscious groups of intelligent, highly trained people that are intentionally attempting to manipulate and deceive the vast portions of the population. That becomes extremely dangerous, and that's what's happened. It isn't that there hasn't been some element like that down through many centuries in the human family, but it's now developed to this science now of how to do this. Neurolinguistic programming, subliminal advertising, conscious psyops operations. The Central Intelligence Agency has succeeded in convincing a substantial majority of people in the United States that anybody who believes that UFOs are real is clinically mentally ill.
Hmm.
It's a whole program that got mounted. It's a psyops operation that the CIA has been allowed to develop to deploy outside of the country to manipulate civilian populations in so-called adversary nations so they can undermine the effectiveness of their society, so they
Hmm.
can actually get access to their resources primarily for our corporations. There's nothing surprising about that. That's what they're doing, you know. But the vast majority of people have fallen prey to that, and so that you try to, even now, even with all the publicity around, you try to talk to the average person, and they think that they're required as a cultural response to roll their eyeballs and giggle and laugh about it if you talk about UFOs, you know. But if you get them to one side, and get into a confidential or intimate enough kind of relationship with them, they'll say, "Well, actually, my grandmother saw one of these things," or there's relatives that we have who have seen these things, and they're very credible, and it's kind of puzzling, and they're a lot more interested in it than they will publicly acknowledge.
From your perspective, what are ET's intentions with humanity, and is humanity already converged with ETs? Are humans ETs?
Well, there's three questions in there, but
Mhm.
the what was the first question you started to ask?
What are ETs, like proper
What's their
extraterrestrial?
agenda?
They're not on this plane of reality or in this dimension
What's
or in this planet. What are their intentions? Why do they
yeah,
care about Earth, it seems, from
well,
what I've gathered?
yeah,
And
that,
have
well,
we already interbred with
yeah,
ETs? Are we a
okay.
version of ETs ourselves?
Taking the first question, and
Yeah.
that is, what is their agenda? That number one, you have to start out with the fact that there are at least five of these different species. There seems to be kind of completely convincing evidence that there are five different species here. You not only have the kind of short grays, they call them, the tall whites, the so-called mantis people, the reptilians, and then there's this entire discussion about these Palladians that are the Nordic types that look like human. They're Homo sapiens, which is a whole additional puzzle what that all means. But the bottom line is that one of the first things that we have to find out is what is the juridical relationship that these five species have together. Is there some sort of unified kind of protocol that they've agreed to? Is there some sort of federation of any kind? What kind of collective governance do they have, if any? And then if they do, then to figure out what the agenda of that collective decision is. Or are they operating independently? Do they each one of these different species come from a different star system? They each have a separate agenda that's been generated by their culture. We don't know yet exactly what that is. It's one of the main things we need to find out about, because it's quite clear that there's been an awful lot of time spent by our intelligence community, at least an element of it, trying to figure this out. But one of the things we know, there are hundreds and hundreds of people that have seen them collecting flora and fauna, and genetic material on our planet. It appears that they're quite interested in the genetic material on our planet. And you can speculate from that point forward as why they're doing that. You can have either assume a benign motive or some sort of more sinister motive. But if you give them the benefit of the doubt, you would think that maybe what they're doing is they're gathering genetic material here on our planet to basically help seed life elsewhere in the universe, on planets that have actually they can sustain life, but they just haven't been able to gestate life. Our planet appears to gestate life. It's one of the comparatively rare planets in the system, our galaxy, that gestates life. There are obviously others, because there's other beings from other star systems. So there's obviously some other planets that gestate life elsewhere in the universe. But this seems to be a valuable phenomenon of helping generate life. There's life loves life, and whether they're extraterrestrial or whether they're us, that we tend to encourage life, support life, and so that may be what they're engaged in, and there may be some common protocol to be doing this among them. We don't know yet. It's one of the things that I want to find out the most about. When we start breaking through into the secret realms of our government, they're hiding these secrets. That we have to have a whole set of specific inquiries that we're attempting to find out about. And the important thing is that we're not trying to find out about them to be able to assert dominion over them, to develop weapon systems, to be able to dominate our planet and get and maintain a continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials that may be in other countries. You have to understand what our motives are in trying to find out this information. And so what we're trying to do at the New Paradigm Institute is to have the highest possible motives to ascertain this information for the benefit not only of us, but for the benefit of all of the other beings that are in our galaxy. But the minute you start talking like that, our national security state thinks that you've gone native or something, that you've somehow you've relinquished your absolute unique loyalty to our nation state, to lord it over others. I mean, that's what they're engaged in wanting to do. And the minute you buy out of that and you say, look, I'm not supporting that. I'm not supporting you trying to be the dominant power on the planet. I'm not supporting you trying to be 4% of the population on the planet, consuming like 40% of all the non-renewable resources every calendar year. I'm not buying into that particular agenda, and so they start immediately suspecting that you're disloyal, right? And so I've already crossed that Rubicon years ago. I'm saying, look at that. My objective and the objective of the New Paradigm Institute is to try to have the highest, most eleemosynary, goodwill desire to find out what this information is, so that we can do whatever it is we can possibly do to benefit virtually everybody in our galaxy. That since we know they're there now, and we know they're coming and going from here, that our objective is to try to figure out how to have a set of policies, principles, policies, and programs that mutually benefit everybody. I mean, and people may think that's a little naive, but it's quite specific what we're what we're talking about doing, and it may be experienced by the national security state people as adverse to what they view to be their mission. They quite clearly do, but they just think that we're naive. But I think that we have a lot of allies, especially in the spiritual and religious communities. The spiritual and religious communities seem to be devoted to something like this. If you can get above the kind of selfish institutional interests of the Roman Catholic Church that have caused so much problem in the history of the world, or any other one particular religious tradition, maintaining hostilities and aggressive attitudes toward others, or competitive, attitudes toward others. If you can get to the essential spiritual values of genuinely elevated consciousness, and see to it that we're all trying to help everybody in our entire galaxy that we know are here to mutually benefit from knowledge. At least you know what your mission is. You're never going to accomplish your mission if you don't know what it is.
Have have ETs interbred with humans? I'd like to take a moment and share a word from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Huel. I'm a fan of Huel. They have saved my butt on many a trip. They are a high-protein, nutritionally complete bag of deliciousness. They contain 27 vitamins and minerals, 40 grams of protein, which is huge. So I can throw this into a shaker bottle or into a cup. It mixes actually absurdly well, which is a cool thing. I'm genuinely very surprised. If you try it out, you will see how well it mixes. It's actually kind of strange and amazing. I like these guys a lot. They're very convenient. They've saved my butt many a times. And literally just a couple weeks ago, I was at a hotel. Everything was closed. I had a few of these in my bag, and it was incredibly helpful. So I think that they are delicious. I like the ingredients inside these things. They feel very nutritionally complete to me, and you guys can get yourself a discount as well. So there's a limited time offer. You can make healthy eating simple. Get Huel today with my exclusive offer of 15% off online with my code ALIGN15. So you go to huel.com/align15. Huel is spelled HUEL.com, code ALIGN15. New customers only. Thank you to Huel for partnering and supporting the show.
Clearly so. It's not interbred. What they're doing is they're doing gene splicing. Quite clearly, they don't appear to be able to breed across species. Any more than if a goat had sexual intercourse with a cow, it doesn't take, because their species divides there. So they're different species than we are, except for potentially this Palladian group that appear to be Homo sapien, or at least if that's real. But they engage in genetic splicing, gene splicing. They take a genetic material, chromosomes. Well, as we know, what they do is they take egg cells from human women, and as you know, a male sperm and a female egg cell, they have only 24 chromosomes, as distinct from the 48 chromosomes that are in all of our other cells. And that the whole process by which we reproduce is to combine a 24 chromosome sperm with a 24 chromosome egg cell, and it generates a 48 cell blastula, that begins to kind of then develop. And so what they do is they take a human egg cell with only 24 chromosomes, and then they take some of their chromosomes from their cells, and they gene splice it, and then they replace that now 24 chromosome fertilized egg, and they implant it in the womb of the human woman, and they allow that pregnancy to continue all the way to the end of the first trimester, and then all of a sudden that woman is abducted again, and she discovers that she's no longer pregnant. And so they clearly have figured out a technology of removing a 3-month developed human zygote, and bring it to full fruition outside of the body. They clearly are doing that. Now, as to why they're doing it, what their ultimate objective is, whether they're trying to have some sort of a hybrid race that can, they certainly don't pass for human beings. I mean, I can tell you that. I mean, that effort that they're engaged in, you mix a tall gray with a human being, they don't, they're not going to sit next to you on the bus, and you go, there's just another fellow human being. It's quite clear that they're not any of them that I've ever seen drawn. The pictures they drew of them, you can tell that they're hybrids.
I don't expect you to have an answer to this, but who do
Yeah.
you think was Jesus, and what do you think about Immaculate Conception?
Oh, I think that Jesus was I tend to agree with Teilhard, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. That Jesus and the Buddha and Lao Tzu and other high level adepts are mutations. They're biological human mutations, Homo sapien mutations that are evolving these faculties that are going to distinguish the next iteration of our human family, that have these kind of abilities of levitation and telecommunications and all these other kind of things that they display. That in each one of those traditions attempts to convince their followers that their avatar is the only one who can do this stuff. But the fact is, they all do it, right? And that all people with proper training and proper attention can develop these particular faculties. You know this. I mean, those who go over into the study of these spiritual practices know this. That's what meditation is all about. That's what the kind of a special diet is. That in refraining from overstimulating your body with distractive things like recreational sex all the time that kind of just blows out your sensitivity systems, because that there are things that are known about this. But I think Jesus was one of the avatars. It's from the axial age when these particular people, Zoroaster and the Buddha and Confucius and the various avatars they began to manifest, that this is the forward cutting edge of the evolutionary process that our human family is undergoing right now, moving evolutionarily toward the next iteration of our human species. Okay. And that in the same way that Homo sapiens is distinguished from Neanderthal by the development of these major frontal lobes, the biological development of these frontal lobes within which reside the intellect, that differentiate us from Neanderthal. That's what Jesus, I think, was, and I think Teilhard believes that, and I think that's why he was silenced by the doctrine of the faith in the Catholic Church, to prohibit him from teaching about this stuff.
Do you believe much, most, or perhaps all of ancient history of gods, goddesses, demons, spirits, things of the sort could be conflated with extraterrestrial encounters, possibly?
uh, I think that's a little too reductionist. I think that a lot of it is the display of this arising faculty in our human species. These faculties of unitive experience, these faculties of remote viewing or bilocation or astral travel. These are these kind of angelic qualities or miraculous type of activities that we engage in. I don't believe that those have to be undertaken by ETs. These are things in us that are evolving teleologically in a kind of progressive direction. Uh, and I think that the attribute of those particular qualities to human beings, a lot of regular people consider them gods. And some of them have even allowed people to consider them to be gods, like in the Egyptians, the high level Egyptian people who developed these kind of capacities and displayed those capacities, and then exploited that to be praised and rewarded for it, and put them in a position to be able to dominate others, which is unfortunate. But there have been examples of very benign people who display these kind of, like Jesus and the Buddha and Confucius and others, who were completely giving of, of the benefits of those kind of insights that they had. But I do believe that there does appear that there have been moments when there has been either telepathic intervention or actual biological intervention. It's quite clear that a woman who has no recollection of having been with a man for over a year and finds herself to be pregnant, uh, and knows that she hasn't had intercourse with anybody for over a year, that they're kind of stunned that this has happened. And if that child were brought to full term and was born and had kind of special gifts of some sort, there would be a tendency on the part of our human family to suggest that there's something miraculous about this, and if in fact that were initiated by an extraterrestrial species, which we know that they're doing now, we have all kinds of evidence of the fact that they're doing that now with women. I've interviewed them face to face. I've had direct conversations with women who've had this experience. When I was with Dr. John Mack, you know, and so that is completely consistent with an extraterrestrial potential intervention. Uh, and I don't know of any other explanation for how, in fact, a virgin birth takes place. But as you know, that Hermes was supposedly a virgin birth. That's a common. I don't want to call it a trope, but it is that in a lot of these ancient religious traditions, their avatar was supposedly the result of a virgin birth. uh, you know, and so that the Catholic Christians get terribly anxious about any discussion like that. That this is something other than just Jesus of Nazareth is the only one that's ever happened with. But there are all kinds of stories about other virgin births that give rise to these other religious traditions. Uh, and and I don't know whether, as I say, I don't know of any. People have desperately tried to come up with some kind of theories how, a mutation, a mutated cell could accidentally, interact with an ovum, a female ovum, and initiate a birth of a child, without any male sperm cells. And I've never been convinced by any of that stuff. So there's something interventionary that is alleged to have taken place. And I don't believe that Joseph just in fact had sexual intercourse with Mary, and they were both conning everybody, even though that might be the most facile explanation for it, but I don't think so.
My last question for you: if you had to pick a date that disclosure to human society will happen, when do you believe disclosure will happen, if it will happen at all?
I think it's likely to happen under the presidency of in whoever was elected in 2028. They'll be elected in November of 2028. They'll come to office in January of 2029. And we should have succeeded through the New Paradigm Institute, the UAP Disclosure Foundation, the Solve Foundation with Gary Nolan and the folks, the scientists that are all working on this. I think, and the members of Congress like Burleson and the folks in the task force, I think will succeed throughout the remainder of the Trump administration, putting enough pressure on them to have to or to reveal more and more of the information. I don't believe we're going to get any truly significant revelations during this administration, the remaining, 2.5 years or whatever it is that we've got left. I think that the national security state is going to be too effective in keeping it confined to the same kind of minimal information that's already been revealed in the 4 tranches of information. Oh, look at those distant lights. Aren't they interesting? And look how they're moving. Gee, we can't figure out what this is. We're all still totally puzzled by all of this, I mean, that whole kind of propaganda campaign that's going on now. But I think that we're going to be successful throughout this next 2.5 year period to get so much pressure onto to the administration to have to start revealing these things, that they're going to start revealing these things, and the new administration people are going to be so surprised at what they find out that they're going to feel compelled to have to share it. So I think that the next administration, the one that's elected in 2028, is going to be the administration that's going to reveal substantial information about what's really going on here. I do believe that there's going to still be some information that they don't find it necessary to reveal. And they're going to do just what like Obama did with regard to Abu Ghraib, and just like everybody, all these guys do, is they protect themselves and they protect their fellows involved in governing. There's this whole governing class that aren't going to rat each other out. They're going to conceal the fact that they were, super dosing these young kids with amphetamines to jack them up, to display their psychic capabilities, to try to get them to be able to be trained to fly these craft telepathically. There's a whole bunch of secrets that are going on that I'm sure that even the Democratic administration that's going to be coming in almost certainly in 2028 is going to feel compelled to continue to keep secret. But I think that administration, over the 4-year period between 2027 or the 3 year up to 2030, we're basically going to get these revelations between 2027 and 2030, and that by 2030 we'll have a fairly good grasp on what it is our government knows about the ETs, and that's going to, I think, inspire the ETs if our government is successful enough in getting it not only exposed, but starting to take concrete steps to adjust some of the institutions, our economic institutions, our geopolitical relations with other countries, et cetera. If we start taking the legislative steps that are necessary to integrate the knowledge that we're going to be getting from the extraterrestrial species, so that we can have a comparatively smooth transition into the next era of our human family. I think that's going to start beginning between 2027 and 2030.
Daniel Sheehan, thank you so much for your life, your path, being able to bring information like this in such an eloquent way. I really appreciate you making time to do this.
I appreciate it. I mean, I find it an extreme privilege to get to even have access to this information, and I want to make sure as many people find out about it as possible. So that, it's not anything extraordinary that I'm not the source of the information. It's just other information, and I hope people now start absorbing it, and we all work together to bring about this not only the next era of our relationship with these beings, that in the next 10 years we're going to be establishing the protocols in governance system for our relationship with this extraterrestrial civilization for the next 10,000 years. Aaron, I mean, we're extraordinarily privileged to be born at this particular time. Those of us that are alive to get to participate in this process, so we're all blessed. We're all blessed to be here now.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you. We'll include links to, you say you have a school?
Well, no,
education
the New
platform?
Paradigm Institute. The New Paradigm Institute, is here. It's very simple. It's newparadigminstitute.org. And
Awesome.
we have the Citizens for Disclosure that you can sign up and become members of Citizens for Disclosure and get
Amazing.
this free information,
Amazing.
that will get you in touch with your particular congressperson, your senators, get a chance to get to see them, and when they come to your congressional district, set up meetings with them, to keep them working on this process. So that's the New
Awesome.
Paradigm Institute.org.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Terrific.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, Aaron.
That's it. That's all. We'll see you next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed that episode, you might also enjoy this episode over here, as well as this one over here. Thank you for subscribing. Appreciate you. I'll see you in the next video.